What is up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be speaking about the disappearance of 21-year-old Melanie Metheny, a mother of three from Bell, West Virginia. Now this case is very complicated because it seems that there was very minor and, according to the family, unsatisfactory police work that was done in the case. I will obviously show a few examples of that throughout my video. It was also closed relatively quickly. There was essentially no coverage on the case until America's Most Wanted was able to speak about it. And on top of that, the family seems to have done a lot of the research on their own. Authorities and the family have two entirely separate timelines. They somewhat follow each other, but the family seems to have found a lot more based on different witness accounts from those that knew Melanie and the area at the time. And so therefore, there are very different ideas as to what exactly happened. Now, from my understanding, the case has been closed, but according to the Kanawha County Sheriff's Department, they claim that they work cases until they are solved, and her case is one of two still listed on their website. So I'm interested to see how this plays out, but unfortunately it seems like a lot has kind of gone silent over the past couple of years. So before I get into the entirety of this case, I need to thank NordVPN for partnering with me on today's video. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with NordVPN, they are an award-winning virtual private network that essentially takes all of your data and puts it through an encrypted tunnel by hiding your IP address, therefore protecting all of your personal information while you are browsing online. We all usually have apps running on our phone in the background, or we have different passwords and credit card information and things stored on our laptop and different websites. And even from the comfort of your own home and your own devices and even your own Wi-Fi, some of those things can be at risk, especially those of you that use a lot of Wi-Fi publicly. With NordVPN, you can have up to 6 simultaneous connections so that all of your different devices are protected. There's no data logging, 24/7 customer service, and also a 30-day money-back guarantee if you are not satisfied. One of my favorite perks about NordVPN is that they actually allow you access to different entertainment websites. So if you have a movie or a documentary that you've really been wanting to watch but you don't have access to it in your country, it kind of allows you a way in. With the way that technology is moving, I feel not enough people are as protective as they should be over all of the personal information we just so blindly trust putting onto our devices. So NordVPN has been something that's been important for me. It's already saved my butt a handful of times at this point, and I think you guys would really enjoy it as well. It's super easy to use. I actually have a NordVPN app on my phone where I can literally hit one button to connect and disconnect and look through all of the different servers that I can connect to. And there's also a Chrome browser extension. So one click literally protects you and you never have to think about it again. Right now, NordVPN is offering a 2-year plan with a huge discount as well as 1 month for free. All you have to do is go to nordvpn.com/Danelle and use code Danelle at checkout. Thank you again to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. And now onto the details of this case. So I'm going to try to explain this case in the best way that I possibly can. Now, because there is, information authorities have released and there's information that the family has kind of released from their own findings, it can be a little bit confusing. I also noticed when I was going through the website that the family has created for Melanie, there is a comment section there where a lot of people, especially family members, seem to have put out a lot of information they have found. It kind of changed throughout the years, which made it difficult to follow. And also there are names involved that I didn't recognize, and it seemed more like a gathering area for locals that already knew these different rumors and backstories. So while I'm sure I'll miss a little bit of the information here just because I couldn't get a full understanding of it, feel free to go and check out that website and a couple other links that I have listed down below if you want somewhat of a better picture and understanding. Melanie was born on June 21st, 1985 to Jimmy and Debbie Metheny. I know that she had 2 brothers and eventually went on to have a half-sister, and they all grew up together in Bell, West Virginia. She was a very quiet and reserved child, and she remained that way as she got older. She attended Riverside High School, and around the age of 16, she ended up pregnant with her first son, Ryan. I don't know much about the relationship between Melanie and Ryan's father, Michael. I am assuming they weren't together for very long because she did have another son in 2 years. But there's just not a lot of information out there about that. So based on small bits and pieces that I've gathered, transpired, it was just a regular civil relationship after they had Ryan. At this point, after leaving Riverside High School, Melanie went on to attend Garnett County Career Center for their adult education program. Her goal was to basically take as many classes as she possibly could so that she could enroll and be accepted into West Virginia University. Her big dream was to be a nurse. She wanted to attend nursing school. I believe she actually wanted to work in pediatrics specifically. Within a year or so of having Ryan, Melanie ended up meeting another man named Matthew Harper, and they went on to have a son named Nathan and a daughter named Hannah. And he was working, she was working hard at school. I believe she also may have had a job. And so to make things easier on the couple, they lived with Matthew's parents. I don't know the name of his father, but I do know his mother was Donna Harper. And this is someone that Melanie seemed to be incredibly close with. But this situation made it a lot easier on them. She was able to continue going to school and continue working. She was saving, hoping to have a house of her own. So it was a positive situation, but unfortunately, about 6 months prior to her disappearance, so roughly in December of 2005, Melanie left Matthew for reasons I do not know. Now, because she had relied on living with Matthew and his parents, this was kind of a tricky situation. She had 2 children that she was taking with her. From my understanding, she basically had sole custody of the children. I don't know if it was anything legally agreed upon. I do know that she would obviously always let the children see their father if they wanted to, and she would frequently make trips to see Donna Harper and let her grandchildren be with her. But she needed somewhere stable to live with her children fast. She ended up moving to a home on Midland Avenue in Bell, West Virginia with her 2 brothers and her half-sister, Stephanie. So at this point, that's where she's living with Nathan and Hannah. From my understanding, at this point in time, Ryan was spending most of his time with his father. But at this point, Melanie continued to balance work. She continued to balance school and being a full-time single mom, putting away cash for a better life with this huge end goal of having a house big enough that was all her own, that she could have all of her children there with her under one roof. She maintained good relationships, again, from all accounts that I have personally seen, with the fathers of her children, with their families. Like I said, she would frequently stop by the grandparents' houses. And then along the way, in March of 2006, she ended up meeting a man named Jared. So I've seen that this person's name is Jared, and I've also seen Jarrett. Honestly, I've seen both of them so frequently that I am not even positive which one is correct. But apparently they hit it off. He was also a single father, so that's one thing that they had in common. He did have a 9-year-old girl that he at least had partial custody of. Her name is Harley, and I guess that's one of the largest reasons they really got along together. And according to comments I've seen on the family's website, one of her half-sister's close friends is kind of the one that introduced them. It seemed like almost like a matchmaking situation, again, just from comments that I've read. So pretty quickly, Melanie started spending more and more time with Jared, and eventually she started to live part-time with him on Campbell's Creek Drive in Charleston, West Virginia. And I will have a map of the whole area, the whole county. It's basically a cluster of tiny towns, all within pretty close distance of each other. I think getting from one Bell to like 2 towns over, if not more than that, was only about 30 to 45 minutes. So just a small area. I don't know too much about her relationship with Jared. We were only together a couple of months. She met him in March and she went missing by July. So I don't really have much to say about this relationship. And this brings us to Melanie's disappearance. So on Wednesday, July 19th, 2006, Ryan was with his dad, as he typically was during this time period. So Melanie woke up. She had been at the home on Campbell's Creek Drive, so where Jared lived, and she took Nathan and Hannah to Country Kids Daycare in the 3000 block of East DuPont Avenue in Bell. She dropped the kids off around 8. I've seen 8 to 8:20 roughly, but she never showed up to pick them back up by closing time at 6. Now, the staff at Country Kids Daycare immediately were shocked by this because Melanie had been taking the kids there, from my understanding, for roughly a year. This had never happened before. She was always very pleasant with the staff. Her kids always appeared very well taken care of. She always communicated with the staff, and she was never late to pick them up. So they attempted to call Melanie a handful of times, and when she didn't answer, they decided to call the kids' paternal grandmother, Donna Harper. Now, when Donna answered the phone, she also was absolutely shocked. So she agreed to pick up the kids and take care of them, and also called Melanie's father, Jimmy, and her grandmother, Sandra. So just like Donna, they were equally as shocked. Like I said, she was a very dedicated mother, and this was entirely out of character for her. While Donna went to pick up the kids, both Jimmy and Sandra decided to head to Jared's home on Campbell's Creek Drive to ask if he knew where Melanie was. And according to different comments that I've seen on the family's page, like on the page for Melanie, the website, people kind of had some odd feeling like something was wrong prior to her disappearance. So maybe that's why they so instantly went to ask Jared where she was or if he knew anything. Now, according to Sandra, when they arrived, Melanie's car was not outside of the home, and when Jared opened the door and they informed him that Melanie didn't pick up the kids, he did seem shocked, but he didn't at all seem concerned in their opinion. This was obviously already odd that he didn't seem too concerned about the situation, but it was even stranger to them when they asked if he would come out with other family members to search for her, and he outright refused. I have seen some sources state that he claimed to have called Melanie around noon that day. According to these sources, Jared stated that by this point in time, she typically would have contacted him, and when she didn't, he contacted her. I don't know what further steps he took, but I also would assume that would mean he would have been more concerned later on that afternoon, and that just wasn't what Sandra and Jimmy picked up on. So at this point, Melanie was reported as a missing person to the police and was immediately labeled a missing and endangered individual. And the family hit the ground running. They started to search over town all night. They were searching for Melanie's gold minivan. I believe it was a 1998 minivan. They were looking at all the different spots she could go to, but they had absolutely no luck. Authorities also began their searches, and they also started to look into every possibility of what may have happened to Melanie. Now, obviously, one of the first things they had to consider was how possible it was that Melanie would walk off, willingly, that she would maybe want to escape from her life. And maybe they were thinking she's a single mom, that can be difficult. She has 3 children, she's bounced around from house to house. Maybe she just wanted to escape it all. But according to quite literally everyone that knew Melanie, and this includes the fathers of her children, the paternal, families of her children, they all strongly disagreed that Melanie would ever walk away from her children. Period. Every single day, Melanie essentially lived for her children. All of the goals that she had was to better the lives of her children, and she was so close to achieving that. She had been accepted into the West Virginia University. She was starting classes August 2nd to progress in her nursing career. She had been saving money. She was hoping to get a house soon. So everything was falling in line, and there seemed to be no reason she would want to just run away and drop all of this. So this was, for the most part, kind of ruled out, and they decided to start working on a timeline, figure out what her plans were that day to maybe see if anything had gone wrong along the way. So according to Jared, he woke up at around 7 a.m. that morning, and Melanie was already up and getting all of the kids dressed and ready to go, and was essentially out of the door by 7:15 to 7:20. According to Melanie's family, this was one of the largest red flags. Melanie was not a morning person, especially in the summer when she didn't have to be, and it didn't make sense that she would be up and awake that early and getting all of the kids ready to head out of the door when this was not something that she had ever really done before. Jared also stated that Melanie mentioned going to Garnet Career Center to pick up her transcripts because she had upcoming classes and things that she needed to deal with when it comes to West Virginia University. However, the family also thought that was strange because she had already sent in her transcripts. Typically, when you are applying at a college or any university, period, you have to give them your transcripts as part of the process. So she was already scheduled. She was already going to start on the 2nd. It means that the university already had her transcripts, and it didn't make sense that she would need to go pick them up again. So as I stated, she ended up leaving the house sometime likely between 7:15, 7:20-ish, and she had Nathan, Hannah, and Jared's daughter, Harley, 9-year-old Harley, in tow. Authorities were able to find that she took Harley, her grandparents' house, off of Dry Branch. According to Harley's grandparents, I'm assuming this is where authorities got the information from, and some of Jared's siblings, Melanie stayed there for a few minutes when she was dropping off Harley. She spoke with the family a little bit. I know that one of Jared's siblings was planning on going to a water park that day, and she wanted to take Harley with her. I do know that Melanie offered to go back to the apartment to get a bathing suit for Harley, but this was shrugged off because they would just figure it out. So according to those that she saw, she seemed in a fine mood. She didn't seem in any rush because she was willing to drive all the way back to the apartment to get a bathing suit. And she also to them mentioned needing to go to Garnet County Career Center to pick up these papers, these transcripts. After this, she headed off again. So authorities believe she then went 10 miles away to drop both Nathan and Hannah off at the Country Kids daycare, which is where she left them and never picked them up from. They were apparently able to confirm with staff that she did in fact bring her children in. They were able to confirm it was sometime between 8 and 8:20, so it took her about an hour so far for this whole trip. And they also told authorities that she planned to get transcripts as well. So she essentially had, told everyone the same story according to what authorities have stated they found, and that she would be back by noon to pick up the kids. So she didn't intend to be gone for too terribly long, only a handful of hours. From this point on, things are really kind of a blur for everyone. No one really has any answers after this point. It should have taken roughly 18 minutes for Melanie to get from the daycare center to Garnet Career Center. But according to Garnet Career Center, Melanie never showed up. She also never showed up to West Virginia University to hand off the transcripts like she said she was going to do. But cell records did indicate that she was doing something at around 9 in the morning, so about 45-ish minutes after she dropped the kids off. At 9 o'clock, a call was made from Melanie's phone to a repair shop called Recommended. I've seen a handful of different pieces of information in regards to this. I've seen that she already had her car fixed. I've also seen that she was just confirming an appointment. I'm honestly not sure which way that this goes. I wasn't able to confirm through different resources, but apparently a month prior, a teenage boy had stolen her van, and it was eventually returned to her. There was minor damage that had to be taken care of, and this shop was either where she already had the repairs made or was going to be where she was going to have the repairs made. I don't know everything about the incident with this teenage boy. I've seen some comments on the website state that they'd worked out a deal in order to not involve cops. He was just going to pay for it, and they were going to drop it after that. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, authorities claim that they spoke to individuals that were at Recommended, and the person that took the phone call was able to confirm the voice on the other end of the line was in fact Melanie. The family believes that this wasn't actually confirmed, and so if Melanie was the one that made this call is kind of up in the air, at least in the family's eyes. 30 minutes later, there was a second phone call to Melanie's voicemail, which obviously is not something that can be confirmed. But we do know they were at least roughly in the same area, and also according to what the family has stated, I don't know if they have proof of this or if this is just speculation, but they believe this phone call was made to her voicemail to delete all of the messages inside. Now, the interesting thing about both of these calls, the calls to Recommended as well as the calls to the voicemail, is that they were both from kind of the same location. And the cell towers they came off of were from an area in West End, which is the farthest west side of Kanawha County where this all occurred, possibly into the neighboring Putnam County. This is 20 minutes past Garnet County Career Center. So it would have taken 18 minutes to get to the career center and then another 20 minutes to get to the location where her phone was used at 9, which would indicate if it was her, she immediately drove all the way over to the west side past the place she claimed to need to go that day, and no one has any idea why she would have gone over there. When the family was alerted of this information, they were immediately taken back because the West End is, according to authorities and the family, not necessarily the best place to go. It is known for drug and criminal activity, and it is not somewhere that she would have gone by herself or just gone in general. This obviously brought up a lot of questions in regards of drugs, and could she have gone there to buy drugs? And according to the family, she obviously was 21 years old. She would occasionally drink. She would occasionally socially use drugs. But from what I've seen, said by those that knew her, she did not use hard drugs, and she definitely wouldn't have gone in the middle of a Wednesday morning to go pick up drugs from the West End. This just wasn't, this wasn't her character. At this point, they have Melanie stating to numerous people she's going to pick up transcripts that the family says, you know, she wouldn't have needed to get. She never actually stopped at the location she told everyone she was going to. She drove way past it to an area that she wouldn't typically go to. So there was obviously something strange going on here. So authorities started to question other individuals, and inconsistent stories began to come out. And I do want to state that some bits and pieces of what I'm going to tell you did come out years later. Just again, I'm not sure which pieces because authorities haven't reported a lot on this, and there's not a ton of specifics out there. So just know this is PC information that kind of unveiled itself in a matter of years. So the days leading up to Melanie's disappearance are a blur, and no one seems to know exactly what she was doing. And this is something that confused me for a very long time until I really got into the comment section on that website. So according to Sandra, she watched all 3 of the children the night of the 17th into the 18th. And I believe it was so Jared and Melanie could go out on a date. I believe they went to the movies and had some dinner. The following morning, she dropped the kids off at around 9 and only spoke to Melanie for a few minutes before leaving. And I don't know what she stated her demeanor was at this point, but I'm assuming it was just normal. And she didn't suspect anything was wrong, because I think if she did, she likely would have said something. And this is where it gets kind of funky. So after this point, the day before Melanie disappeared, what she did is really up in the air. And I'll explain why in a minute, but Jared was believed to be at work this day, and she spent the day with just her kids. I believe Harley maybe was somewhere else. Maybe she was with her grandparents. I'm unsure. But she spent the day with her kids, her half-sister Stephanie, and Stephanie's friend named Chris. And Chris is the one that apparently introduced Jared and Melanie, or at least played a big role in matchmaking them. Now, versions of this day have repeatedly changed, and these are the different versions that have kind of been put out there. So it's believed that at some point during this day, they may have gone to a nearby park all together, and then they eventually made their way back to Jared's home on Campbell's Creek Drive. At some point during the day, Chris's boyfriend also stopped by and hung out for a little bit, and then I think eventually he left. And then at around 7 p.m., Melanie took both Chris and Stephanie, drove them from the Campbell's Creek apartment to their separate homes. Obviously, Stephanie went to her home on Midland Avenue, and then Chris went to her home. I don't know exactly where that was. Other versions of this event state that they never went to this park during the day. It's just believed they possibly may have been there. There are also claims that they never actually went to the Campbell's Creek Drive house, and that they went to Chris's house instead. And there's claims that Melanie never drove anyone anywhere, drove anyone home. She left from Chris's house by, herself with just her children. And I couldn't figure out for the longest time why none of this made sense and how they didn't know this, how authorities couldn't confirm exactly what happened this day. From the bits and pieces that the family have released on the website, what they have said is that both of these individuals have been shielded from the investigation from some way for one reason or another, that they've either never been asked to speak, or authorities have just pushed them to the side. And they've also stated that both of them, shortly after it's believed Melanie was abducted, were strong-armed and essentially beaten into staying quiet by someone. So this would explain why there's no real knowledge, why neither of them really have come forward to say anything. And I believe it may be even deeper than that. And I don't know exactly what the family is thinking. So one thing that's for sure, though, is that something was going on with Melanie that day. Because one thing the family knows is that Melanie repeatedly asked both Stephanie and Chris that day to stay with her the day of the 19th, the day that she disappeared. She, according to what I know, she never specified why she wanted someone to accompany on her errands that day, but what I do know is that she was adamant. She repeatedly asked both of them to come with her. I don't know if either of them ever agreed to this. There's thoughts that maybe her half-sister agreed to it, but no one really knows. Again, all of this is up in the air, and the family believes it's because these women were forced into being quiet. But this put up another pretty big red flag because it makes it seem like Melanie was really worried about something the day that she went missing. When you add that to the fact that she told everyone she came in contact with what she planned on doing that day, maybe she was just an overshare, but she told quite literally everyone what she was doing, that she was going to this Garnet County Career Center. And then you also add that to the fact that she changed her pattern that day by waking up hours earlier than she typically would. It really makes you wonder why she did all these things. Was she hiding from someone? Did someone threaten to find her somewhere along her day? At this point, authorities started to look into the idea that maybe someone had some sort of issue with Melanie that may have led to something happening. We already know that someone basically took her van and took it on a joyride, a local teenager, but there also was another incident with this individual a week prior to her disappearance. The teenager that stole Melanie's van ran into her in the street while she was out with one of her friends, and they apparently really got into it. According to those that knew Melanie, this was very out of character for her. She was not the kind of person that wanted to have issues with people. She was not confrontational. Again, from what I'm understanding, they, were already either, making moves towards fixing her car. It already had been fixed. So it seems strange that she would see this guy on the street and again kind of go after him. Apparently, after walking away from this argument, the teenager picked up a large rock and was about to throw it at Melanie when her friend saw this, warned her about it. So she turned around, he put the rock down and ran off. And this is definitely odd behavior. It's even odd behavior on Melanie's part because everyone that knew her said that she was not a problematic person. She didn't want to start problems or have problems with anyone. But it didn't, to authorities, seem like something that would end in Melanie disappearing. I personally wonder if it was something deeper. Was there a larger reason that this teenager came for her van and that's why she was holding this grudge against him? Did they know each other? I have all these different questions. It just makes me very curious. Also, because she called the repair shop right before everything kind of went silent. So at this point, they didn't believe she ran off on her own. She also didn't really have issues with individuals. So, it didn't make sense that something would lead to her disappearance. At least that's what authorities were sharing with the public. So authorities at this point said that they didn't believe she ran off with anyone. They couldn't find any reason that someone had an issue with her that was large enough that may have ended in her disappearance. Also, according to what everyone knew, there weren't really any issues between Melanie and the father of her children and their families. But then authorities started to receive some very frightening tips. And this one is kind of a very interesting one to me. And there's a lot more information on this on the website and the comment section. But when this was initially announced by authorities, they didn't state what the tip was. They didn't say who the tip came from. And I kind of understand why now. So apparently this tip came in from Melanie's ex-boyfriend and the father of both Nathan and Hannah. So this would have been Matthew. Matthew, sometime between 4 and 6, I've seen both of those times. This was the day that Melanie went missing. He was at his job. He worked at a company called Airgas, which was in the West End. He was outside that day when he noticed a red SUV kind of parked somewhere across the street. And he immediately noticed that there was obvious commotion coming from this vehicle. There was a blonde woman inside the car that appeared to be struggling desperately to get out of the vehicle. She kept repeatedly being pulled back into it. And he specifically remembered one point where this woman screamed out, "What about my babies?" before being pulled back into the car ultimately. Now, this was not immediately called into authorities. I know that a lot of people question this. First of all, he wasn't aware at this point that she had never shown up to pick up the kids. He had no reason to believe that this was Melanie. He said that the voice did sound like her, but I feel like most people wouldn't jump to the absolute worst conclusion right away. But when it comes to just calling the authorities in general on this, I know that a lot of bystanders are sometimes hesitant to report situations like this, unfortunately, and especially with it being the area it was where crimes and drugs run rampant. I'm sure they see odd things all the time, so maybe they just got desensitized to it, and that's why he didn't call in. But I do know, again, according to the comments, that at some point kind of a connection was made. I do believe he at least called Sandra, because Sandra, the grandmother, ended up coming back out to that location and was able to get a partial of the vehicle. Now, the partial either read 9EY735 or 7EY935. But apparently, when Sandra went to pull this partial off of this red SUV that was believed to be the car that she was in, a big angry male came outside and basically scared her off. Now, according to what authorities released, there were a handful of other individuals that called about a red SUV. I don't know how many of them were confirmed to potentially be the same SUV. There was, I believe 1 or 2 individuals calling about a messed up looking woman that was being held inside of a red car. It matches up enough to, in my opinion, indicate that there's a huge chance that Melanie was in fact the one in the car that day. Between that and her phone kind of pinging for the last time in the West End, it was questionable. So authorities decided to try to figure out if they could locate this red SUV. I believe it was a Ford in specific, and they ran these different partial plate numbers and everything, and apparently got absolutely nothing back. So despite all of these potential tips, really nothing came from it. A few tips came in after this, leading authorities to yet another area called Witcher Creek, which is about 15 minutes in the opposite direction, kind of heading east from the daycare. Now, I'm unsure what exactly these tips were. I have never seen it mentioned in any of my research, but it was obviously enough to have authorities show up full force. They had K9 units, rescue crews, people on foot, and they searched the entire area until 1 a.m. before calling it off. And from their language, I don't even believe it was just one tip, but numerous tips that led them to this location. But unfortunately, they weren't able to find anything. So they were back to square one until July 23rd, which was, she went missing on a Wednesday. This was the following Sunday, when Melanie's tan 1998 Chevy Gold van was located. The van had been abandoned in an intersection of Wyoming Street and Buring Avenue in Charleston, West Virginia, which was about 6 minutes away from the Career Center, and I believe only like 5 minutes further west would have been where Matthew spotted this red SUV. So according to the information we have, we know she was at the daycare, and then this phone call that possibly could have been her was found in the West End, and the car was somewhere in the middle of that, which to me either indicates A, someone knew what her plans were that day, meaning that someone that may have taken her was close to her and knew to kind of like drop the car that way and make it appear as if she had just abandoned it or something happened along the way. Or she had tried to head back herself to the Career Center and something happened along the way. The neighbors claimed the van had been there since around 2 p.m. the day that Melanie went missing. And since the neighbors were obviously that observant, I find it hard to believe that something could have happened to Melanie right there where she had a struggle with someone and nobody saw it. It was in a very populated residential neighborhood. The neighbor said that they originally didn't connect it to the disappearance, but when one neighbor finally connected the dots, they decided to call it in. The van itself was locked. It appeared properly parked on the side of the road, again, almost as if she just took her belongings and got out of it. There was no new damage on the vehicle. You could still see some of her personal belongings on the inside. I know one of her CD players, a few of her favorite CDs, her camera was in there. There was paperwork for her WIC cards, the women, infant, and children's. But her purse, her phone, her ID, her bank cards, everything like that was missing from the vehicle. Again, as if she just kind of grabbed her purse and left. It didn't appear like there was ever a struggle in the car. They did, in fact, find a Bell police officer business card in the front seat. That was apparently linked to a prior, obviously unrelated incident, but there was a piece of paper inside of the car with a phone number and a note about a house that was, I believe, for sale in St. Albans, which is on the west side, like very, very west, almost leaving Kanawha County into Putnam. So this makes me wonder if maybe she had gone to the West End willingly only to look at this house, and then maybe was trying to drive back to, the career center when something may have happened to her, and then her car was just dumped nearby. But again, there's such little information that it's really hard to piece anything together. So authorities decided to bring this van in to test it forensically to see if they could have any answers at all. And they were shocked to find that the car had been wiped clean of prints. There was nothing at all in the car that was of any forensic value. So at this point, they really had nothing. They had an abandoned car with no evidence at all to point what happened to her, where Melanie had been taken, who may have taken her. She certainly wouldn't have parked her car on the side of the road and then wiped her own fingerprints off of it. So clearly this indicates someone else likely was involved. They had evidence of her kind of driving, from Bell, Charleston, West End. She's kind of all over the place. We have these different SUV sightings, but nothing seemed to be working out and everything seemed to be going to dead ends. So they were pretty much stuck. So this is when I believe Melanie's family started to create their own timeline. Authorities failed to question a lot of some of the last people that spoke to Melanie. According to a comment that was left on the Find Melanie website, some people weren't questioned in Jared's family until 2011. So we're talking years later. So I don't think they questioned Harley. Granted, she was a minor, and I don't believe her family was allowing this for numerous reasons. But again, some of the last people to be with her and see her and be able to speak about, maybe her demeanor or what she was saying her plans were to them. It was also strange to the family because days after Melanie disappeared, her half-sister, Stephanie, that she was close to, that she had asked to help her that day, that couldn't give a straight story about what exactly they did that day or what she was even doing by herself that night. She ended up moving out of the state days later, and she, from my understanding, never gave a reason as to why, and this obviously looks very suspicious, especially when statements were kind of so inconsistent, and I think it even took years for a lot of those statements to come out. The family was also worried because of Jared's behavior. They didn't know him very well. They had only been together for a couple of months thanks to someone that couldn't even consistently say what they did with Melanie the day prior to her disappearance. Jared seemed to have no interest in coming to help search for her. The family really started kind of pushing authorities and trying to get answers from them, and they seemed to just be ignoring the case, ignoring important people that they needed to speak to. I know that the family at one point even asked them to send the case over to the FBI, and they didn't want to do that. I know the family also hired numerous private investigators, went ahead and paid them lots of money up front, and then the private investigators would start working on the case and then immediately be scared off by local law enforcement. I think particularly it was Kanawha County Sheriff's Department. And this was just a really big red flag to the family because authorities seem to be kind of skating around certain people and information. Those same people have either left town or just have stopped speaking to everyone. I know that a lot of other people that Melanie met or became friends with after meeting Jared or just involved with Jared also kind of fell off the map. According to the family, people would return back to town totally like incognito. They would slide in without letting anyone know they were there, and then they would be gone again. And it's obviously sketchy behavior. And if this was you and your, loved one, you would probably feel the same way. So that's why they started looking into things on their own and going around and questioning a lot of people. And they were able to unearth a lot, which gave them an entirely different timeline and perspective on the case. So according to the timeline, and again, I've seen a few different versions of this as time has gone on and they've kind of tweaked it. So I'm going to try to explain this the best that I can. But again, things seem to have changed quite frequently. But they believe that she still left home sometime between 7:15 and 7:30 in the morning, but still believe this is very out of character and is still a pretty big red flag. According to the family, it's possible that either she really did go and drop Charley off at Dry Branch and then immediately went to her Midland Avenue apartment she shared with her brother and her half-sister, or she may have possibly skipped Dry Branch and gone straight to Midland Avenue. The reason they believe this is because a neighbor spotted Melanie at 7:40 a.m., which is about the time it would take to go from Campbell's Creek Drive to Midland Avenue. And they had a conversation. She was heading to this apartment, possibly to go knock on the door. She clearly wanted to speak to someone that was there. She may have wanted to get something. No one's really sure. And this neighbor was walking up the steps when Melanie kind of waved them down. And they had a brief conversation. They apparently spoke about why Hannah, was given the name Hannah. And I don't know what her demeanor was, but at 7:40 in the morning, this neighbor puts her at the Midland Avenue home. This neighbor also stated they saw 3 kids in the car, which is why there's this question about when exactly Charley was dropped off. So if Charley hadn't been dropped off first, I think they believe at this point she went and dropped Charley off and then came back to Belle, where she stopped at a local 7-Eleven on DuPont, where the daycare was, I believe, just down the road. Cashier there vividly remembered Melanie coming in that morning. She would always park her car at the very front parking spot so she wouldn't leave her kids unattended for very long. And she came in and bought 2 drinks for the kids and then got back in the car and left. And at this point, it is believed that she, for the second time that morning, drove back to Midland Avenue because a witness that knew her, again, was very familiar with her, saw her almost make it to Midland Avenue, but then randomly just bang a U-turn and head back the direction of the daycare, which a lot of people question, why did she do that? Did she see someone that she wanted to turn around from and go the opposite direction from? Obviously, there's a lot of questions up in the air here. So this would bring us to between 8 and 8:20, and at this point, she dropped the children off at the daycare center again. This has been confirmed already also through authorities, but the family has stated that the individuals at the daycare center also said that they saw 3 kids in the car. So there's also another possibility that Charley hadn't even been dropped off yet. And instead, after the daycare center, Charley was dropped off last, meaning that there's just a bunch of bouncing around here that didn't make a lot of sense. And it's believed that it was maybe because she was worried, again, something was going to happen and wanted to have one of the older children there with her for most of the time. There are certain times where they have specifically placed things as if they knew for a fact based off of information, but because there's so many different versions, I kind of wanted to give it all. However, over the years, Charley and other family members have come forward. So someone at least claiming to be Charley came forward on the website in the comment section and said that she was immediately dropped off by Melanie that morning. It was the first stop that they made that day. And she seemed very upset that anyone would kind of question that her father could potentially be involved, which again was just kind of one of the rumors. Obviously, that's going to happen when you decline to search for someone that you are in a relationship with and living with, because that is suspicious behavior. But she was very adamant that her father loved Melanie, wouldn't have done anything, that she was not taken around this crazy ride all around Belle, and that she was in fact immediately dropped off at Dry Branch. A few hours after this comment was made, another family member or person claiming to be Jared's younger sister, it's hard to tell who exactly these people are and if they are who they say they are, just because it's a random comment board. But this person said they were Jared's little sister. They were there at the time, and that it was early when Charley was dropped off, that she was immediately dropped off and not taken to Belle. This person was able to confirm the entire water park story. So the family's kind of timeline is argued with quite a bit by Jared's family, it seems. And that's where a lot of tension really comes into play. I know that a lot of Melanie's family and different individuals close to Melanie really were frustrated I believe Charley wasn't questioned for an extended period of time. And according to this comment section, if Jared's little sister, if this was in fact her, she admits right here the first time she was ever spoken to by police was April 12th, 2011. So there were a lot of issues here. And according to the family, the children were spoken to. Obviously, Hannah was going to be 2 at the time. She was almost 2, so she was too young to really remember a lot of things. And Nathan was, I believe, almost 4 or just barely 4. And he had repeatedly told the family many times that Charley was in the car until the time they were dropped off at daycare, or just some extended time, that she was not immediately dropped off. The family has stated that they had that statement from Nathan, checked by an outsider, by a third party. It was confirmed that this was in fact what he saw and what he remembered. And so they believed it was possible that for some reason, possibly related to the disappearance of Melanie, that Charley was coached into giving a certain version of the events. I understand why the family would feel this way. There were so many people that started to come out of the woodworks, people that never helped lift a finger to search for Melanie, but also claimed to be her good friend, didn't say anything for years, and then would come out and kind of poke at a rumor for a minute and then disappear again. And so it just felt like everyone knew something that they didn't know. But again, Charley remained very adamant that she wasn't hiding anything and that no one coached her to say anything, that she was dropped off. Her father wouldn't have had anything to do with Melanie's disappearance. So for a while, it really turned into a pretty large just finger pointing situation. In the comment section, there were other names that were dropped of individuals that I've not seen as being a part of this disappearance. It just seems like most of the information in this case is all started by just rumors that are spread by locals and people talking. And it's unfortunate because I feel like had the media kind of covered this differently and had police done further police work on it, a lot of these different rumors probably could have been squashed very easily. But when you leave the family and the few people involved or having their names questioned to deal with these situations, and hash things out on their own, no wonder it turns into a situation like this. The family just kept releasing their own information that they found. That, for instance, they had some reason to believe that the police actually knew where Melanie's car was the afternoon that she went missing, but for some reason they didn't show up to get it until the following Sunday. I also know that the only large platform her case has really ever been on was America's Most Wanted. And according to them, they tried for 18 months to speak to the Kanawha County Sheriff's Department. And the Sheriff's Department basically refused or tried to postpone it for 18 months, claiming they just missed their call repeatedly, but then never actually got back to them with any information. And it made the family wonder, why? Why don't you want to hand this over to the FBI? Why don't you want America's Most Wanted to speak about this case? Why don't you want our PIs working on it to try to help you solve the case? It just seemed weird. And then it became even more frustrating because the neighbors said the car was kind of at that location since 2 p.m. the day she went missing, and even more witnesses came forward to the family. There was someone that lived in Campbell's Creek Drive, right near where Melanie had been staying with that van. She had a very specific American flag license plate. That person was in the West End that day and saw the van drive by at around 1 p.m. And that very easily could have been driven by someone that, was responsible for Melanie's disappearance. And I have no idea, and I don't know if anyone knows, if authorities gathered any security footage. It seems like there were a lot of different industrial areas on the West End. There was bound to be cameras somewhere. Her car was found in a residential neighborhood. Were any of those homes checked to see if they had security footage? I just find it so odd that so many people see her car all around town all day long, but somehow no one saw when she was attacked, who she may have been attacked by. No one saw who dropped her car off. And despite being all over town, I'm talking like 45 minutes, distance all over the place, there's not footage anywhere that is beneficial to authorities. So at this point, everything went quiet, everything went cold. Authorities essentially stopped working on it, and Sandra and other family members continued on trying to find out what happened to Melanie and some sort of answers, because she now had 3 children that she was abruptly stripped away from, and they deserve to have their mother, and they deserve to know what happened and why. And I know that Donna ended up taking care of and having custody of both Nathan and Hannah, but I've also seen she passed away, and I don't know where they ended up. I know that Ryan obviously stayed with Michael, but I have seen family also complain that he essentially took Melanie being gone as a way to keep Ryan to himself, and he wasn't able to see his other siblings. And there's just so much heartache that has stemmed from this one act that someone decided to take, which was abducting Melanie, and who knows what they did to her. And this right here is just exactly what happens, is these individuals choose to commit some horrific crime, an act of violence or something against someone, and it ripples through entire families. It's not just affecting them, it is affecting everybody. And this case, it's so apparent, and it was heartbreaking to see the comment section and see what the family has said, screaming for help. Like, just comment after comment with just help us, please help us in all caps, begging for someone to report on it, begging for someone to say something, someone to help them, authorities to actually do something. For years and years, it puts like the biggest pit in my stomach. But then in 2013, they thought they had a big break. A year prior, in December of 2012, a resident in the Witcher Creek area, which is the same location that authorities searched very thoroughly right after Melanie went missing, within like a couple of days, a resident called into police stating they had just witnessed a forceful abduction of a woman. Authorities were able to track down the perpetrators to a woman named Cindy Creethers and her boyfriend Joey Jeffrey, who was a known drug dealer. Obviously, initially, this is an entirely unrelated case. They were thinking they were just going to bring in both of these individuals. They were going to press charges against them. It was going to go to trial and yada, yada, yada. But they ended up being able to get Cindy to crack pretty quickly, which led to a plea deal, which essentially gave her 5 years in prison in return for her testimony against Joey Jeffrey. And they waited a year for this testimony, again, not thinking there was any sort of connection here. But when she got on stand, everything took a turn. The actions that they took in the abduction of a woman named Leanne Quinn, who, interestingly enough, was Joey Jeffrey's own cousin. So he abducted and threatened forcefully his own cousin over a drug debt. So while explaining everything that was going on, she explained that at one point he did make a verbal threat to her. And he said, "Do you remember Melanie Metheny? I will put you in the same hole that I put her in." Clearly, this took everyone back. According to Cindy, he said that he would have done it, but he just didn't have enough gas to get there. And I think it even made her question if he was in fact responsible for the disappearance and apparently alleged murder of Melanie Metheny. So authorities, after the trial, wanted to sit down and question him. And I believe they did, but it ended up, from my understanding, going nowhere. They did label him as a person of interest, but he has never been arrested for it. He has never cracked and brought forward any more information. And so a lot of people started to wonder if he maybe just used that as like a threat. Like, he never actually had anything to do with Melanie's disappearance, but he just used it to try to scare the crap out of a woman that was local, because everyone local knew about Melanie. There are a lot of things that are hard to ignore. For instance, the fact that this was something that occurred in Witcher Creek, which multiple individuals called into authorities about Witcher Creek in regards to Melanie's disappearance. He also forcibly abducted a woman, and if the SUV was in fact holding Melanie, obviously we have a forceful abduction here, and that's something that's believed to have happened to her anyways. We also have that this woman was attacked over a drug debt, and then there's also the fact that Melanie was in the West End that day, and it has been questioned if she was somehow introduced to drugs or was involved in drugs more than everyone thought because of her new boyfriend. I'm not saying that he did drugs because I don't know, but there's a lot of speculation out there that maybe she kind of shifted and got involved in things she wasn't used to being involved in. Maybe she was trying to protect someone. Maybe she was going to pay off a debt or something, or she owed a debt and someone came after her. But as I said, this is all just speculation, and he has not claimed, from my understanding since then, to have been involved in her disappearance. Now, I do know that there are a lot of people that believe she was not, again, involved in drugs because her family said she was not heavily involved in drugs. There were rumors going around that she owed someone a certain amount of money. I believe it was around $300. She was saving up money, and according to some, had she ever been in a position where she owed someone money and it became a life or death situation, she would have taken the money she had saved for housing and been able to pay something off. She didn't have tons and tons of money saved up, but she had enough to get herself out of something like a $300 drug debt. And also, a $300 drug debt is not likely going to end in the disappearance and presumed murder of someone, at least not most of the time. So no one was quite sure what to believe, but it definitely did spark a light under this theory that drugs could potentially be involved in her disappearance. And this seems to be one of the larger theories that the family believes, that something was going on. Everything seemed to go downhill and change drastically when she met Jared. No one knows if she maybe was just introduced to a new crowd that was involved in drugs, because all these same people all of a sudden fell off the map the second she disappeared. It just all seems so suspicious, and it seems like everyone is just hiding something. Her family has stated that a lot of the times when Charley would be dropped off at the grandparents' house, that sometimes Nathan and Hannah would be watched by them as well. So the fact that she dropped Charley off there but made it a point to take her kids to the safety of something like a daycare makes the family really wonder if someone was watching her. Again, we know she may have been paranoid or worried about something that day because she had asked for someone to be with her. I personally think the whole U-turn in the middle of nowhere while heading to the Midland Avenue house is strange. Did she see someone following her? I know all of these people are, told to look for Melanie's car. Did you see Melanie's car? Do you remember seeing her car? But I wonder if anyone remembers seeing someone following her. I have unfortunately been in a circumstance where I have been followed before, and it also makes me wonder if that's why she was on the West End that day. Maybe she did for some reason have plans to go to the career center, because again, that would be a safe place for her to go, surrounded by lots of different people. So even if she had taken the transcripts already and she didn't need them, if she felt like she wasn't safe, that could be a good public place to go to be safe. But if she's being followed and notices that, she likely will just keep passing by so she doesn't have to stop alone in a parking lot. Did she just keep driving and keep driving, and that's why she ended up in the West End? I wonder if she made this phone call to recommended if it was her because she wanted it to look like she was on the phone talking to somebody. Unfortunately, there are just so many ways that I feel this could go, but it seems pretty believed that someone was either following her, stalking her for some reason, and that is what happened. It could possibly be someone that was close to her and knew what her plans were that day, because the car was in fact left near the career center, only a few minutes away, and I don't think that someone would kidnap her in West End, just coincidentally drop her car off near where she was saying she was going anyways. Someone wiping the prints off the car as well indicates to me that this person was potentially a criminal already, or this had been very planned, which also makes me agree with the fact that she was being stalked or followed, or she did owe someone a debt, and this person knew exactly how they were going to get rid of her silently. I don't know. I don't know what to believe. All I know is that it's still an unsolved case, and there are still 3 children out there wondering what happened to their mother. The families had to do so much of this fighting on their own, which makes absolutely no sense to me. I'm devastated that PIs have backed off the case and that, the FBI can't seem to get a hold of the investigation. I just hope that a lot of these individuals and her family fighting so hard in her case to figure out what exactly happened to her, I hope that they get the answers that they deserve. And I hope that someone's able to get their hands on this case and they are able to figure out what happened, or hopefully someone's conscience gets the best of them and they start talking. There's a lot of people out there who have answers and they're getting older, and hopefully they will eventually crack, realizing that they are absolutely tearing apart a family. But that is all that I have for you guys today. If you have any opinions or theories on the case, make sure to leave them down below. As I stated, majority of the information on this case is from the family's research. And all of this is kind of strewn about in comments on their website. There's also a Facebook page where they speak about these things. So if you want to stay as up to date as possible and dig through the information yourself, which I highly suggest, I have all of that linked down below. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Melanie's story. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Hallan fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.